And we are live. Welcome to the Three Things with Dr. B. At the Mu Dojo, we believe that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And we ultimately and intimately are connected to one another, sometimes in ways we cannot fully explain. And therefore, as we are having a conversation about the three things today, we have to recognize that sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And in particular, we cannot anticipate the positive impact we may have on someone else. And no, you don't need to be famous or make millions of dollars or be a New York best-selling author to make a difference for others. And that's why we're here today. My guest today is Don Richardson. Don has been a trial lawyer for more than 25 years, primarily defending healthcare providers when they are sued for malpractice. I was never sued, by the way. Before that, he worked in state and local government offices, supporting elected officials and department leaders. And now he's on a new adventure with the launch of Crystal Creek Productions. He's a writer, a podcaster, and a public speaker. Please welcome Don.
Thank you very much.
So
I'm waiting
Don,
for the applause. I'm waiting for the applause. Sorry.
Yeah, all right. So Don, before we start with the question of serendipity, although that will probably segue directly into it, tell us a little bit about you and how did we meet?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story. And to be honest with you, I didn't really fully understand it until we had this conversation not too long ago. I joined Thought Leaders about a year ago, thinking about wanting to give a TEDx talk and potentially move my legal practice into something in a positive way to communicate with others, either through podcasting, publishing, or public speaking. And late last year, I had an incident that happened that was, I would consider life-changing. I was wrongfully arrested and put in jail and spent 18 hours not sure exactly why I was there or what was going on. And as a result, it eventually cleared up. But while I was in a jail cell in an orange suit, laying on a bare mattress, I thought to myself at that point in time, what if my life is over? What if everything I've ever done up until now is done?
So that is crazy. You're saying out of the blue, you are where? In your house, and then police comes in, puts you in cuffs?
Yeah, the police came to my house. About 6 or 7 police cars come to my house about 1:30 in the morning, and they come to my, they wake up my family, and they come into the house and take me outside and put me in handcuffs and put me in a car and take me down to the county jail.
And do you even know at that point what they're accusing you of? Like, did they say something about it or?
No, they said that I was involved in a potential I was involved in a hit and run, is what they said. Or I left the scene of an accident, which I had not been in an accident.
Right. And then you
But
told me you find yourself in prison that night and you start almost doubting yourself. Like, was I in an accident? Like, it becomes, you're in the part of a movie scene or something.
yeah, it was really strange because I tried to really hard think about it. Now, for the first probably 10 or 12 hours I was there, I had no idea why I was there. I couldn't even imagine what it was that they had thought I had done. And then at one point, my wife and my daughter had arranged for an attorney to come and meet with me, and he had told me a story about how a woman was hit and killed during a hit and run, and that I was the suspect. And at that point, I spent about the next 6 hours trying to figure out how that could have possibly happened.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out it was not me. Turns out that they did find the person who actually did it, and that person's now been sentenced. But while I was in the cell, it made me think about, okay, what am I going to do? And what if this is it? What if everything I've worked for, whatever thing that I've always dreamed about still doing could never happen because of this?
So now rewind a little bit and tell us, what have you been doing up until now, up until that point in your life?
I've been practicing law as an attorney. We mostly represent nursing homes. So it's an important job, but it's not what I dreamed about doing, 30 years ago before I became an attorney.
Did you want to
Um,
be an attorney in the first place?
it wasn't my dream at
Mm.
first. I became an attorney because I was working for a lot of elected and local officials, and I found that every time I was in a meeting, everybody had a law degree. And so I thought, well, maybe I should get a law degree so I can uh, be in a better position to help whoever I was working for. But at the time, I graduated from law school. I got hired by a trial attorney and started doing that. And then life kind of took over. And 27 years later, I'm still doing that. So that's what I've been doing. But I always wanted to do something in the sort of creative space, media, writing, public speaking, that type of thing. And that's what I've been thinking about.
So I have to stop you there. You said life took over. It's almost like we cruise. We make decisions in our life. We decide to go through law school, through medical school, or into the corporate world, and it's almost like, I mean, it is a proactive decision. We do choose to do that, but it's not the entire picture of us. And so suddenly you're on this prison floor wondering what's going on, and maybe your life is over, and you eventually get out of that, and so you suddenly wake up to yourself. Like, what happens then?
It just makes you feel like, sometimes you have dreams or you have things that you want to do in your life or things that you believe in that you say, well, I'll do it someday. I'll do it someday. And it made me realize that someday is never comes. You have to
Uh-huh.
actually do some things now if that's what you want to do. There's no more time to just say, well, it'll happen someday.
And then
And
you mentioned earlier that you joined Thought Leader. So first, Thought Leader, we need to explain what that is, and the name has changed in the meantime. So we're talking about Leader, LEADR.com. Tell us about, why did you choose Thought Leader?
I'm trying to figure out, I think I saw something on Facebook or some other social media about ways to help you develop your public speaking business, including potentially getting on the TEDx stage, which people who are familiar with TED, there's the TED event, and then there's also all these communities throughout the world that do smaller events that are TEDx events. And I decided, well, that was something that I was willing to, I knew I needed some training. I needed some expertise. I needed somebody to help me kind of figure out some of the things that I didn't know. And so I had joined them, and I was really trying to work through that process when the events that I talked about earlier with the happened. And then all came when that all ended, whenever it finally was clear that I wasn't me and that there was somebody else and I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life in jail or potentially in jail, I realized that now was the time. So I went back to Leader, which is Leader now, and said, okay, now I'm going to focus in on doing this. I also, okay.
What's fascinating here is that you had already had the impetus of joining Leader before that event. So you had already put a seed into that potential change.
Yes.
And at the same time, we in our conversations, you've told me that moment was still a defining moment that led you to say, this is really what I want to do.
And I can remember, I can visualize laying there, and I was part of my brain was trying to figure out what had happened and trying to go by everything I had done and why it was me that they had decided had committed this potential crime. At the same time, I was thinking, what are all the things that I won't be able to do now I because of these circumstances? So when It took a couple weeks. I mean, I was released the next day, but it took a couple weeks before they sorted everything out, and there was
Mm,
still a lot of uncertainty. But when it finally came to an end, I realized it was time to not just say next year, next tomorrow, and whatever. It was time to do it. So it was kind of putting the two pieces together. And then I came across Forbes and started thinking about, okay, besides just doing like a TEDx talk or becoming a public speaker, I wanted to write a book, which was something was always my goal in life.
mhm,
And I had started working on a project about this whole process of what I call a winding trail, that your life takes you on all these different paths, and you start out intending to go in one direction, and life events change your direction, and all of a sudden you find yourself in your 50s and you say to yourself, how did I get here? And but it's too late. A lot of people think, oh, it's too late. I didn't go to class, go to the right school. I didn't study the right stuff. I spent too much time doing this and not enough time doing that. And part of my idea was, how do you help inspire people to know that it's never too late to, fulfill your life dream? It's not a dress rehearsal. We all
mm.
have, we're all at different stages in our lives, and it's only us that's holding us back from doing the thing that we want to do. So I was going to write this book, and I published on Leader, on the chat room, that I was looking for people that were going through midlife changes, that have actually either are going through it or have done it. And guess who responded?
There I was. But what's interesting in what you just said is you spend most of your life cruising along and thinking one day I'm going to do this. And at some point you turn around and you're like, well, I didn't do it, and that means probably I'm not meant to do it, and it's too late anyway. I mean, this is sad because I think a lot of humans go through that process. And so, how do we help them wake up to this earlier, right? I mean, I've done the same thing in a way, stayed in the corporate world for much, much longer than I ever anticipated, and was kind of miserable. So it took for you to be arrested. I mean, this is like, you're not, you have to imagine this. Whoever is listening now to this podcast, imagine being woken up at 2 a.m. in the morning, banging noises on the wall, on the front door, and 7 or 8 police cars. I mean, at least it was not the FBI, because that's probably even worse. But then being cuffed in front of your family and being brought into prison without even knowing that you did anything wrong. I mean, come on. So, we all go through some kind of event like this. Yours is definitely a, movie feature worth or book.
Well, I don't want to see that movie.
But then fast forward, so we are both in Leader. We meet, we start talking. And then the other day I was telling you, so imagine we were talking about serendipity in a way, right? And what happens, why are we in this particular path in our life versus another one? And then I said, well, realistically, if you hadn't been arrested last year, would you be here today in front of me? Would we be friends? And would you be in this podcast today?
I would probably have to say no. I mean, there's no way of actually predicting whether there was another path that would have led this to this point. Who knows? But I hadn't even thought about it until I realized, connecting the dots, that what one thing led to another that led to another. So, for example, I changed my LinkedIn to not only show that I was an attorney, but it also showed that I had created this
Business.
Crystal Creek Productions, which is really just a LLC that I created. Actually, I did create it a year ago, but I hadn't really done much with it.
Mm.
And I also talked about myself as being an author and those things, which are all works in progress. But had I not put Crystal Creek Productions and talked about writing, I doubt that I would have been contacted by Forbes and started that process. And when I did that process, that led to this sort of detailed book plan that I have put together. and I shared with you ultimately. But if I hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't have posted on Leader, which I was already a member of, that I was looking for people to interview, to talk to about this process that led me to you. So it is interesting how sort of multiple events that don't seem to have any connection whatsoever actually can serendipitously lead to new opportunities.
Yeah, that reminds me of an image that I put a quote online, but it's a quote from Steve Jobs about connecting the dots. And if you look in the mirror, like in your, how do you call it, your side mirror in a car, you can connect the dots of what happened in your past because it has happened, and now you can say, oh yeah, because of this, then this happened, and because of that, then that happened. But when you look forward in the future, those connecting points exist or will exist. You just don't know that. So that's the whole point of kind of manifesting and envisioning the future, not knowing how it's going to happen, how the dots are going to be connected, but projecting to what we really want, like the being in vibration with and in harmony with what we aspire. And as long as we don't set that destination, it's unlikely to happen. So that's the whole point of envisioning. Anyway, yeah, we're here now.
Yeah.
and
Here we
and
are.
there's something else. I know you may not want to tell the whole story, but the first story you told me when we met was quite outstanding and definitely something that would be so worthy on a TEDx stage. So I don't want you to tell that story necessarily as a TEDx speaker, but what happened that day? What did you do for a lady you met on a train? What happened?
Yeah, so this is the part of the TEDx talk that I'm working on as well. But back in 1993, I was living in Philadelphia, and I was taking the train to the presidential inauguration of 1993. And I got on the train, and I sat down next to this elderly lady. I had my Walkman. I don't know how many people remember what Walkmans were.
The blue one, the metallic blue.
I had the black one, you had the headphones and all that. And I had just gone to New York City to see a musical called Jelly's Last Jam. So that was my cassette tape that was in my Walkman that I was listening to. And typically when I was in those situations, I would just put my headphones on and like lean against the window or whatever, and
Yeah, leave me alone, kind of thing.
not engage in not engage in any type of conversation. But somehow she kind of reminded me of my grandmother, and I started talking to her, and we had a really, really interesting conversation. She told me about her son. She told me that she was leaving. She was moving from New Jersey back to her home in Macon, Georgia. I told her about my grandparents. I told her about what I was doing. We really had a great conversation. And then when she got to the station she was getting off on, I was helping with her bags to help her get off the train. She was going to see her son in Baltimore. And right before that, she had told me that she had been diagnosed with inoperable lung cancer, and that she had made the decision, much to the chagrin of her son, that she was not going to go through chemotherapy, and she was not going to go through any type of therapy, that she was going to go home and she was going to choose the quality of life over the quantity of life. And she didn't want to go through all that. And her son, who was actually, interesting enough, an obituary writer for the Baltimore Sun, and her were having some difficulties because he had lost his older brother a few years before, and felt that he was all of a sudden going to be without a family, and just wasn't able to process it very well. So they got off on so she got off, and I realized I didn't know very much about her. I knew her name, and I had a notepad, and so I just wrote down everything I possibly could remember that she had shared with me. And
And
when
what was going through your mind when you did that right away
I just
after
I
after
just
she
felt
left?
like she had really inspired me, because she had made this decision that she was not going to just, She was 70 or 71 years old, and she still had a long life ahead of her had she not been diagnosed with lung cancer. But she had made this decision that she was going to go back home and spend time with her childhood friends and with the people that she grew up with. And I just found that to be very inspiring. So I felt like I wanted to send. Back then, we send letters. We didn't do emails. We didn't text. We didn't WhatsApp. We didn't do any of those things. We sent letters. So, but I realized I didn't have any information. But I knew her son was a obituary writer for the Baltimore Sun-Times. So when I got back to Philadelphia after the inauguration, I went to the library and did the microfiche until I found him. And then then I went on, I forget what we did have computers for those people who think that computers didn't exist. But I was able to go on and find his address, and I sent him a letter that basically said I had met his mother and she was an incredible woman, and that I understand that he was having difficulty, accepting the fact that she had made this decision about her life. But if he thought about it, it was a very strong decision, and I know that she would want her life to be whatever is left of it for him to be a part of it.
You put that in the letter.
Along those lines. I didn't keep
Wow.
a copy of the letter, but it was something
Right.
along those lines.
Wow.
And I sent it to him. And then at some point in time, he sent me a letter back saying, yeah, basically his mom was, wonderful. She could talk your ear off. She, all this other things. And then thanked me for my letter and said that it allowed him and his mom to talk together on the phone and come to terms with her decision in a very emotional and positive way. And as a result of that, he invited me to Baltimore, and she came up from Georgia, and we all sat down and had dinner one night, and they showed me the photos of her and them growing up together and all that type of stuff. And her name was Connie, and Connie and I became friends up until till she passed away.
Wow.
And I even went to visit her on 2 occasions in Georgia, and she came to my first wedding.
Oh my goodness. That's crazy, right? A perfect stranger on the train.
Right.
Yeah. So I think this is a good transition point for talking about purpose. Because what you're saying is and we just talked about that, serendipity piece. You look backwards, you had that one conversation on the train, and you did make some decisions along the way. You did act upon this, and you probably used a lot of intuition and a lot of what was the feeling, reaching out, trying to put the pieces back and reaching out to her son like this? What's the feeling behind it?
There's a couple of things I think about. One is I wanted to be a journalist, so I felt like I was kind of doing a journalism thing. So it was, that kind of doing the investigative journalism by trying to put the pieces together, it was putting a puzzle together in many ways. The other part of it is I wonder if it was a prelude to going to law school, because, that's what we do also. We put pieces together to either prosecute a case or defend a case. But I think that the purpose, I was driven more by the need to find her and find a way to communicate with her. And it turns out that I couldn't find her because she had not relocated to Macon with an address or anything. I don't think at that point. So I did the second best thing and contacted her son, which I think turned out to be the better outcome for them and for me, and it was and for us. So it was really again a little bit of serendipity, but also a lot of I just felt compelled to reach out. And I don't even know if I think when I sent the letter, I thought, well, who am I to send a letter to a guy about his mom,
And you did it anyway. And that's where the rubber meets the road. You did it anyway. You made that decision.
And that was a good decision. But I think now when we send a text, we sit there and wait for the response. The one thing nice about having just send a letter is You don't know whether it was received, whether it was read, whether it was read the way it was supposed to be read. There's not an instant response.
Mm-hmm.
So then when you get the letter back and it says all the things that it says, and I do have that letter somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's uplifting, and the lesson I learned from that, because before that I was kind of shy, and like I said, I would put my Walkman on and probably not talk to anybody. And it was at that point that I started realizing that everybody you encounter in life is a potential future friend or a potential person that you can learn something with, and you can do things with. So it gave me a new perspective on not being afraid to talk to somebody that you don't know.
That's amazing. And so you already knew that journalism was potentially some kind of dream of yours that you hadn't realized. And is it fair to say that you truly found your purpose in that conversation and what followed?
Well, I'm not sure because I didn't go into journalism. I ended up going to law school. But I think that it did give me the courage, or it did make me feel a little bit like there's a small risk in talking to somebody that you don't know, but there can be a big payoff.
Mm,
And I think in a lot of different ways. And so I think that it gave me the courage. And if you talk to my 27-year-old daughter, who's turning 27 on Monday, happy birthday,
oh,
Katie.
wow.
She'll tell you that when even from the time that she was, her and her mom and I got divorced when she was 3, but we shared parenting, so we each had time with her, our own time with her. And she used to be amazed that every place we go, I would just talk to people. She would get in the car and say, "Why do you talk? Why are you talking to those people? Do you know who those people are?" And I said, "I don't know. I just feel like it's just natural to do it now." But back then, I wouldn't have said a word.
Mm.
So I think it opened my eyes to that possibility. So it did have it. It did change. It did
Did
change
did
things.
that also make an impact on your daughter?
You'd have to ask her, but I would say that I think she at least saw an example of of I was setting whatever example she took from it. But I got to say this about her: she's traveled all over the world,
Mm.
and she has probably taken it to the next step. She's even gone to other countries by herself and traveled for a week, talking to people in different languages and everything. So I don't know whether it opened the door to her answering or talking to strangers, but it certainly opened her. Maybe it contributed. I shouldn't give
Mm-hmm.
any credit. Maybe it contributed the idea that don't be afraid to do something that you want to do, or take a chance.
Sometimes we don't know what we don't know, right?
That's exactly right.
So, regarding that second question of purpose now, what would you say is your purpose today?
My purpose today is to, in some small way, trying to encourage others to look for opportunities to fulfill whatever dreams that they have or have had, and also look for opportunities to talk to other people, because that opens doors. It opens those serendipitous doors that you never know exist until you do it. So my TEDx talk is going to be primarily about talking to strangers,
Mm.
but it's also going to be about, we live in a world where truth seems to be a debate. And we I just read the Surgeon General published that loneliness and isolation are considered an epidemic,
Epidemic.
not only in this country but throughout the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, while I'm not going to be in a position to change everything, but I can certainly make a contribution to help people try to get through that and perhaps find their better purpose. I think my goal is to help other people find their purpose and then realize that they can still fulfill that purpose.
Yeah, that's great. And at whatever age, right? It's never too late. That's
Right.
the concept
One of
of
the persons that when I first started doing the book, when I first reached out to you, I read a piece in the New York Times about a former congressman named David Bonnier, who was from Michigan, and I can't remember where he was in the leadership at one point in time. But the article was that at age 78, he was relearning to play the piano, and he
yeah.
was going to give a piano concerto. I don't know who was going to attend, but that made me think it doesn't matter what age you are. You can be any age, and still do something that's going to inspire or make a difference or just make you happy.
Yeah, I remember thinking when it comes to a dream that a lot of us may have, not everybody, but like going to space. Like a few decades ago, it was not even hadn't even happened, and then when it happened, it was only for an elite. But then, as of today, when you see the number of times that we push people out into space, it becomes possible. Like there are things that were totally unconceivable before. And today I look at my son and I'm like, he might go into space one day. And it might be a very trivial thing to do for the weekend.
That's possible.
And you may have someone celebrating their 100th birthday in space. Who knows? I mean, these are things that we considered totally impossible before. And what your story reminds me of is also, I don't remember the details, but this nun who was like 80 years old, who was a little bit overweight and started to walk, and then decided to walk a little longer, a little later, a little further every day, and ended up being a winner of a marathon, a very famous marathon. And I'm like, what? Right? We are only the limit of our own of
Imagination.
our own barriers. We
Well, what's
create
really
that.
interesting about there's two things. For example, we are all, I mean, the problems of the world are more um, are more in our face now because we have so many different ways to hear about them, whether
Access
it's
to it.
social media, TV, or whatever. Um, and then it can become very overwhelming. Like, what am I going to do to stop climate change, or
Yeah.
what am I going to do to, whatever problem you want to think about, what thing can I do? But then I start realizing a couple sayings that I've always kept in the back of my mind, and I learned a long time ago. They're very common, but one is a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. So all you can really do is take that one step, and then you take the next step, and then you go from there.
Yeah.
And the other one is one small candle can light 1,000. And so if you think about it in those terms, you can do one
You can
thing.
have impact,
You can
basically.
do one thing, or you can do three things, as you do. But you can do one thing, and you never know what that's going to, how that's going to impact other people, and how it may lead to somebody else coming up with another idea that leads to somebody else coming up with another idea. The next thing you know, who knows where it goes? But it doesn't go anywhere if you stand still and you don't share
Right.
anything with anybody.
Right. And we don't know what we don't know in terms of the impact we can make on others, and they are potentially negative impact, but there's also a lot of positive impact, and we sometimes don't even know we're doing that. um and I'd love to hear some examples, but recently I did a TikTok video on this little girl that I saw play the piano in front of an audience, and she was 7 years old, beautifully playing the piano, singing at the same time, which is not easy. And the piece of music was not a simple piece of music. It was several minutes long. And then I heard her mom the next day say, "Oh yeah, she's not happy with it because she made a mistake at some point." And I was like, "Hold on a second. 7 years old, and you're already self-sabotaging and saying that everything is out the window because you made that mistake, and no, you're not made to being a pianist or a singer or whatever artist." So I went to see her. I went to see this little girl, and I said, "You know what? Are you the artist from last night? You blew me away. Your performance was impeccable. And yeah, you may have made a mistake. So what? Don't beat yourself up, trust in yourself. And I'm just hoping that that one message to that little girl may have that impact, as some people in my past did that. So, any example you want to share?
Well, I actually think that's really, I mean, that's what I mean by taking, like, going out of your way, or um, not allowing your whatever inhibitions are to prevent you from doing that. We all remember times when someone came to us and told us something or said something, that inspired us or kept us on the right path. We also remember things that people said to us that were potentially harmful,
Right.
or hurtful. So, you know, but you don't know. All you can do is go and tell her, "Hey, you had a big impact on me because your performance was great." And don't focus on the one or two things. Most people didn't hear it, and don't let that prevent you from going forward. You never know. She might that might be a mantra that she calls upon down the road when she starts,
Yeah.
as she continues to do whatever she wants to do. So I think that's really, I mean, there's probably 1,000 examples of people that have said something to you or that have done something that it just changes your course a little bit, but
Mm.
it actually means, it can mean a lot. It can mean the world.
Well, and like a big heavy boat, you change the course a little bit, but after a few hours, it becomes a huge difference in a different path in your life. And you said something about sometimes it's on the negative side. So I'd like you to reflect back on a moment in your life where you were beat up, and I'm referring to that moment where you were not selected and you remember somebody taking a picture of you when you were defeated. Can you tell us that story a little bit?
Yeah. So, I grew up in a small town. All my closest friends, we all played all sports. And beginning when we were 11 years old, the little league team decided to, or the little league decided to create what was known as a traveling team at that time that would not just play within the community, but would play with against other teams from other
Wow,
communities.
that's a big thing, right? At that
It was
age.
it was a big. It was almost like it was like almost being selected to an all-star team, that was going to play. And I got selected when I was 11 because there was no restriction on the number of 11-year-olds you could have. But the next year, there was a restriction on the number of 12-year-olds you could have. And we had to try out again. And I had what I thought was a really good tryout. And I'm not really someone who would say that if I didn't think it was pretty good, because I would be like that girl. I'd be saying, yeah, I missed that ball, or I didn't, I struck out or something. So I wouldn't have given myself, but I really thought I was going to make the team. And because all my friends were going to be on the team, and when they made the cuts, there was three of us that didn't make the team, and I was one of them, and it was very crushing. And where these tryouts happened was near a family friend's house, and my parents were there waiting for me to come back to tell them, expecting me to say that I had made the team. And someone took a picture of me, and there's a picture of me carrying my bat and my ball or my glove, and you could tell that I had been, like, emotional. Maybe I was crying, or maybe I was beginning to cry, or
Mm.
whatever, and walking back and saying that I didn't make the team. And that was hard because all my friends were on the team, and it didn't feel fair. It just did not feel fair because I had actually had a pretty good tryout. But as in any small town with a restricted number of people that could make the team, with a restricted number of people that's families are from that town or whatever, it was clear that there were certain people that were going to make the team no matter what. And there was really only a limited number of spots for people that weren't part of that community for a long, long time.
Mm.
But it still felt unfair.
So how is that little episode of a 12-year old how does that have impacted your life over the years?
I think that I have this really strong, um, I don't know what the word I want to say, but I have this really strong reaction to um, a lack of fairness. So in positive ways, I think that I react whenever I feel like circumstances are unfair, not just for myself, but for other people.
Yeah.
So that I guess perhaps can be perceived as a positive. Um, and I think as a negative, it probably at some point perhaps felt that if I knew that those circumstances were potentially present, I might not have even tried out. You know what I mean? Or I might not have done something because I didn't think I was going to be good enough, and I didn't
Hmm.
go through that humiliation of being cut.
So a
So I,
little bit of self-sabotage so that you don't even go into the tryout because you don't want to be rejected anyway afterwards.
right. So I
So
think there's a
yeah.
strong part of that.
So you and I did some tapping on that together.
We
And
did.
and you had a little bit of an epiphany during that session. So do you want to share what happened there?
We started out talking about a problem that had to do with just communications with my communications with another person about finances, and that was the thing that I chose to focus in on. And we did the tapping session, and at some point we switched to this moment when I was 12 years old, which I don't even still know how we got from what we were talking about to that moment, but it was pretty amazing. And we went through that whole thing. And whenever I was talking to you about it, I could see that picture. I could see that picture of me walking up from the field with the bat and the glove and the tears in my eyes and that
Mm.
sort of sad look on my face. I could see that picture like clear. And I remember at one point you asked me if I was when we were doing the tapping, you asked me, was I feeling anything in any part of my body? And it was I was feeling this sort of, I don't know, it was a twinge or like an ache or whatever in my left thigh. And when we finished, all of a sudden, I couldn't see that picture anymore. And I still can't see it. I know it exists and I can tell I could describe it to you,
Mm-hmm.
but somehow in my mind's eye, I can't make myself see that picture anymore, which is to me like I don't even know how that's a thing. And then I'm trying to do it right now and I can't. I can see it, and I compared it to the uh, the part in Back to the Future whenever Marty's trying to go back to the future to save the family, and he has this picture of him and his brother and sister, and they're slowly but surely starting to fade away. So now
Uh-huh.
the picture I have is like this faded sort of idea of something that I knew, but I just can't visualize it in my mind's eye.
Like
So
it fades away as if it didn't exist. You know it's there, you remember it happened, but you don't
yeah,
have that connection with your body anymore. It's not triggering you anymore.
it doesn't have any. I can't. No, it's remarkable. I don't even. I can't even. There's no logic that explains it to me.
Well, there is a logic of neuroplasticity, but it's very interesting when we actually experience it because then it's not more like a scientific paper or some kind of scientific statement made by someone else. So it's fascinating. But thank you for sharing because it's I like those examples. Um, so then let's go a little bit into humanity. And I think we've already touched upon your message to the world, right? Talk to strangers. But I like to dig a little bit further and give you the opportunity to kind of tell the message to our fellow humans. Like, what do you want them to do practically that would potentially enhance the entire humanity and help the world together.
I guess without saying it and without having completely thought it all the way through, I think that number one is it's easier than people think. Let people know that it's easier than people think, that these little changes, when you think about changing the world, you're like, oh, that sounds like a huge task. and what's the chances of that happening? But and it's not so much you want to change the world, but you want to change things that you do could potentially change the world, and it all starts with simple acts. And the joke that or not the joke, but the kind of hook at the beginning of what will potentially become my speech is that we're told as young children not to talk to strangers. Like that's one of the first things we're told: don't talk to
That's
strangers.
right.
And
For sometimes good reasons, but
and I'm going to say for that reason, it's pretty good. But we're also told a bunch of other things too, like don't talk in class, don't talk in the hallway, don't talk unless you're spoken to, don't talk at the dinner table,
don't make
don't,
waves.
we are told at a very young age, like you basically shouldn't talk unless something's directed to you.
Mm,
And certainly don't interrupt and don't initiate anything unless, because when you're young, that's what you're told. And I'm not saying that those are all done for good reasons, I'm sure, and a lot of them are necessary. But at the same time, that you've taught me, and I've learned from other resources, is that our brains do get wired in a certain way. And
yes.
the simplest way to, I think, overcome this idea that how we communicate better, because there's so much evidence out there that we don't communicate, that we draw conclusions about people based upon stuff that um, what they're wearing or what their status is or
Yeah.
the car they're driving or the team they're rooting for, whatever it is. I have read and have listened to podcasts where they've talked about our brains are very terrible at predicting the future. They're just horrible. We're not really good at it, but we think we are.
Uh-huh.
And so like when we encounter somebody, we think, well, nobody wants to talk to me, or nobody wants to hear me say anything, or whatever. And it's really kind of overcoming that and saying, hey, just reach out to somebody and say something to them, see what
Mhm.
happens. If they're in an elevator, if you're standing in line, if you were on a bus or a train, just start a conversation. Now some people are going to be like, oh, leave me alone, and that's
And
fine.
that's okay. Yeah.
And that's okay. You have to be willing to say, like, you're going to start something, and people just might roll their eyes and go back to it, and you suffer that silent humiliation to yourself, and you move on. No worse for the wear. But at the same time, you never know how you might say something, and things like making a compliment. Oh, I like your shoes. Oh, that's a nice purse. What floor are you getting off on? Oh, what do you do on that floor?
Mhm.
Oh, we've been standing in line for a really long time. Wow. I wonder if it's, wonder what's holding everything up. But that just opens the door to a normal conversation. And you just never know. That person might be somebody typically, in my experience, if you talk to someone long enough, you find something in common with them fairly quickly.
Totally. Yes.
And it's like, wow. But you would have never known that, and if you
If you
never
don't
opened
ask,
the
you're
door.
not going to figure
So
it
it's
out.
and then we talk about, truth and judgment and all these things. I think it's the real solution is just people talking to each other. It's that simple.
Yeah.
And not doing it on the internet, not doing it over. I heard something the other day. I don't know, maybe you told me this, but you said that we are quicker to criticize someone on social media than we are to say something positive to somebody that we love.
Yeah, that was not me, but yeah, it's probably very true cuz
So the reality of it is, why don't we say things? It doesn't even have to be somebody we love. Why don't we just have a conversation? And I do it every day now. Every day I get on the elevator, every day that I'm standing somewhere and there's somebody strange, I
that's
say to
super cool.
myself, I got to come up with something to say. And I've had some really interesting conversations as a result of it. I've also had some people just say, and that's it.
So it's funny you say that. I guess I did a Dawn last night, because I go train in kickboxing, and then one of the ladies in the dojo I trained with, um, very reserved, right? And if I hadn't opened my mind to just talking to her, I just asked her, so what do you do? Because we started training, and I was like, it's Friday, like happy Friday. And how was your week? And then, it was a tough week, whatever it was. And then afterwards, I said, so what'd you do? And she told me, and her daughter was there, and we had a quick conversation. But what really, um, the big aha moment I had is when it was just a very short conversation. And just before I left, she said, "Thank you for asking." And I was like, oh, I may have made her happy for this, just that question. So what do you do in life? So that, I did a don. So I will continue to do dons during my day.
That's great, but I got to tell you, I think that's absolutely true because one of the things they talk about in this is sort of period of loneliness and isolation, the thing that people feel is that they're not valued and they're invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And so by even if we're not changing the world, but even if you can make one person be seen or
Yes.
feel like they bring value to the world or to something that you share, it makes the biggest difference in the world.
It's
And
pretty, yeah, that's
it's
precious.
and it's like so you get there's benefit for yourself and there's benefit for others and there's benefit for everyone because maybe we become a kinder society. I mean, gosh, we could use some kindness once in a
That's right.
while, right?
That's right.
And you never know, like somebody's going to be able to tell you that, hey, I got an idea. You're working on this talk. Oh, here's something you might want to do, or here's something you might want to read, which is exactly how I came across this. I didn't even know this Surgeon General's report even existed, and because I was talking with somebody, they suggested I look it up, and I look it up, and I'm like, wow, they have this whole long report. Actually, even the World Health Organization has put together a committee to do the research, but the conclusion is nobody knows what the answer is. Like they haven't figured out what the answer is. And so instead of waiting
Wow.
around for these boards to come up with the answer, maybe we should all just start talking to each other a little bit more each day.
Yeah. And as you said, social media is, I mean, it could be the way to do it. But if people are more inclined to say something negative on social media than something positive in real life, then we just need to re-educate people. So that's a very strong message from you, and I love that. Just a quick reflection before we close on, why do we say, and that's my current reflection on our nervous system. Why do we say we need to not make waves and not speak up and not do this and be the good girl and be the good boy, right? And a lot of the neuroscience folks, centered folks, talk about the tiger in the jungle. And I think if you go back, I think there's a lot of truth into where do we come from and where we used to live before we built this entire society around us, which is very artificial. But we used to be, imagine we were a tribe in a cave. And you have these animals around that could come and eat you. Even if you have a baby that's crying, right, it's a danger to the tribe. So I think from very early on in humanity, you had to teach the little ones to not make noise or waves and be kind and be quiet, right? And I've had a similar example for someone. Every time people talk to me about their experience in church when they were kids, and I remember myself going with my grandmother, and the one rule was the rule of silence. I mean, come on. and then strangers would come and talk to you because they were the only ones allowing you to speak up, and these were the bad guys. So
Yes.
we didn't win a lot from that experience. But now, fast forward, we're in a different environment, and we have to evolve humanity to readjust to our current circumstances versus the jungle. And yeah, the jungle is still out there in a way, but that's my reflection on this.
No, I think that's really fascinating because, I mean, our brains have evolved in different parts of our brain have evolved in different ways. And obviously our basic instincts are to, it's fight or flight or, it's about, and there's a lot of things about being a part of a tribe. Why do we want to fit in? Because it's important to be a member of the tribe. If you stand out from the tribe, then you're more likely not to get food. You're more likely to be attacked. I mean, there's all these things that we do that come from our basics all the way
Survival
back,
instincts.
right?
Hmm.
But the other parts of our brain we've developed allows us to know that I'm sitting in a library in Strongsville, Ohio. There's not a tiger waiting for me outside the door. And if I go out there and I say something, there might be a librarian that tells me to hush, but there's nobody who's going to throw a spear at me.
Right.
Okay, so the reality is, I mean, obviously, you still have to, choose your, you have to be respectful of others, but at the same time, those things that we needed to do all those thousands of years ago, we don't have to do those anymore, and we
Exactly.
can use the other parts of our brain to allow us to not just react. And I think that's what meditation and all these, I think even what tapping and
Yeah.
all these things that we've talked about does for you, because it allows your brain not to be just subject to that basic wiring that says, be quiet or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
but it allows your brain to like almost wire your brain in a way that's more useful for you as you live today, as opposed to how you needed to live to survive in your village or whatever.
Yeah, that's beautiful. All right, so I have written a few things that I take from this conversation, and you tell me if that resonates. From a humanities standpoint, a call to action, you said small risk, big payoff. I don't remember in which context you said that, but that's what I wrote. And then you said it's easier than you think to change the world through small acts. And the last thing I captured was make one person be seen and build a kinder society.
Yes.
Anything you want to add, Don, to the
Um,
world?
I just think that, I mean, I like the fact that you called it a dawn, but I don't, I don't have an ego that says it needs to be called a dawn. But my thing would be is everybody look for an opportunity today, and every day to talk to somebody that you don't know, give them a compliment, make them feel seen, um, make them feel valued. And it doesn't take a lot of time, and it doesn't have to turn into a long conversation. But if you practice doing that every day, then it becomes easier for you to do it. And you'll be okay whenever like it doesn't necessarily get the response that you want. But maybe that passes that along to somebody else. And maybe little bit by little bit, we become a kinder, more curious, more interested, more connected society.
Super cool. Thank you so much, Don, for the
Thank
three
you.
things today. Really appreciate it.
I'm glad to.
And yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.